Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Nun Bet. This daf is sponsored anonymously. May the passion of our daily learning be a zchut that we see more and more miracles in the coming days. Amen. Okay, let's get started with where we were up to yesterday. We learned about three approaches to the bat kohen shazinta. Okay, just to remind everybody, we have a daughter of a kohen. Because she causes disgrace to her family and to her father, which we'll talk about a little bit more today, she gets burned. Now, whoever commits the sin with her, this adultery, right? Again, we had a debate. No one thinks that we're talking about a non-married bat kohen. We're talking about a woman who's a married woman. It's basically the same thing as adultery. Adultery, both sides of, in the case of adultery, the man and the woman get chenek, which we're going to end our class with today, where we learn that from. But if she's a bat kohen, then because she disgraces her family's name, she particularly gets a harsher punishment, and that is burning. Also, right, he gets killed, but he gets the regular punishment because he's not to blame for the disgrace she caused for her family. And we're going to see that today, why it's specifically her and not him. What kind of disgrace has she caused to her family? It's not just because she did this act, or at least the way Rabbi Yishmael understands this. That's what we're going to start with today. If you remember, we had this unique opinion. So we had Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yishmael debate yesterday. I'm just going to start from the review of that because again, we had, is it only if she's married? Is it both if she's married and betrothed? That was the debate, the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon, right? Are we talking about both those cases, which Rabbi Akiva held it's both married and betrothed. And if you remember, he learned ubat comes to include an additional case, not just arusa. Where did he get arusa from? Avia. Remember the gzera shava between father. It says it also by nara amurasa. So we're going to say it's clearly arusa. Nisua also married also because it says ubat. He darshans the vav. That was the whole thing. And if you haven't listened to Alana Stein's shiur yet, you should. And then, by the way, I forgot to mention Shuli Mishkan has a whole flashback yesterday on the Hilchot Mashiach and the whole issue of the Mashiach. So it's also an interesting read. You can print it before Shabbat if you haven't read it. And then what about the Pnuya? It's definitely not an unmarried because of the comparison to the Nara Murasa. Now, Rabbi Yishmael didn't need that whole comparison to Nara Murasa because he said very simply, we have the Torah case of adultery. Adulterer, both of them get chenek. Then we have two exceptions to the rule. One is a betrothed woman, who we're going to treat more seriously. Then, which we'll get all into when we get to Nara Murasa, we have a whole section on her, if you're wondering about that. Then we have another exception, which is the bat kohen. So he says very logically, both are exceptions to the rule. One is in the Narusa case, the other must also be in the Narusa case, and therefore it's only betrothed. Okay, which was unique. We didn't think that before. We all thought she was married, at least married, right? The question was betrothed. He thinks, no. Betrothed is the obvious case, and that's the only case. Now, in the ping pong back and forth, we now have a question according to Rabbi Yishmael. Last two words on Nun Aleph Amud Bet. For Rabbi Yishmael, Hayat Avia Himachalela, my Darish base. So what does he do with those words? Because Avia, we had the Gzera Shava for Rabbi Akiva, but he doesn't need a Gzera Shava, as I mentioned, because he just says, exception to the rule, this one, exception to the rule, that one. You don't need Gzera Shava to compare them. So what does he do with that? Now, I want to remind you, the way to read this pasuk is, why does she get sreifa? Because she disgraces her father. And in fact, some people ask, what about him? He's disgracing the father also, right? He's disgracing a kohen. Shouldn't he get? So now we're going to see why it's only her. And he understands a little differently. It's not because she disgraced her father, she gets burned, but as a result of her actions, she disgraces her father. Okay? And as a result of all that, she gets burned. So now you're going to see why it's only her. It's needed for the following bright. Basically, we're going to say Rabbi Yishmael fits in with what Rabbi Meir says here. What do we learn from this et avia hi mechalelet? If they generally treated him with sanctity, they now treat him like a regular person. Kavod, if they gave him respect, they don't anymore. They disgrace him. Now, what does this mean according to the commentaries? That if he got the first aliyah normally, like we do, if he does the zimun, if he's the first to make a blessing, no, not anymore. Now, he doesn't lose his status as a kohen, okay? Someone asked after class, I looked this up, he still is no kapav, he still is a kohen, he's still sanctity of a kohen, he still would do the avodah in the temple, he still would do the birkat kohanim, Okay, we're only talking here about issues where people have respect for the kohanim, and you might say, what? Even in those days they did this. We learned it way back when about the aliyot and all that, right? He would get the first aliyah, he would do the zimun, it all goes back to them. Homrim, and they say, and here you're going to really understand why. Okay, cursed, people say to him, cursed is the person who gave birth to this daughter, to this girl. Cursed is the person that brought her up. You can already see where this is going, right? A child who's bad is a reflection of on the parent. You can't say the parent is scot-free now, right? There's approaches, right, to say, what do you mean? My kids are terrible. Of course it's my fault. Some people say, what do you mean? It has nothing to do with you. They decided to go off on their own, right? But often people connect between parent and child. If the child behaves that way, they're going to say it's the parent's fault. Parent didn't bring them up properly. Parent, right? Parent brought them into this world. Also their fault, even if you say it wasn't the upbringing, but just you brought into this world something awful. And that this one came out of your loins. Okay, I don't think that adds so much more to Yalad. I'm not sure if there's some added value there to that phrase. Anyway, the point is, and we're going to see it even more now, Amar Rav Ashi, Kiman Karina Rashia Bar Rashia Afilu the Rashia Bar Tzedika, Kiman Ki Haitana. So Rav Ashi much later comes and says, the fact that people sometimes call someone, you're a Rasha, the son of a Rasha, okay, is even if their parents are tzaddikim, even if they're a Rasha Bar Tzadik, people call them a Rasha Bar Rasha. It's based on this, because it's their fault. And that explains why it's only her, not the man who committed adultery. It's not the father's fault. It doesn't, because it's not, because they did something in doing this that caused disgrace to the father. It sort of is, but it's because the father's disgrace inherent in the action, it's disgraceful to the father. And then that reflects poorly on the father. It ends up causing disgrace for the father. Okay. There's a really interesting thing here that I don't really have enough time to go into, but I wanted to point out because it's super interesting. When I looked up the halacha, I found that it's in the halachot in Kuf Chavched of Orach Chaim, if you want to look it up, 128. It's later, like in 37, I think, Seif 37. There's a long Seifim about kohanim and duchenim. And it says there that if the Ramah adds this thing based on the Mordechai, who takes this one step farther, this says basically the kohen doesn't get all that respect and all that, right? All the extra things. If the daughter goes and has znut, right, and sleeps with someone else while she's married. But he adds, even if she worships idols and like leaves the religion. Okay. So where does he get that from? Right? So on the one hand, you say, well, it disgraced, right, the family also, right? It's the same kind of thing. And it's a reflection on the father. And they say, why only the daughter, right? What if his son? So first of all, some people say even the son, okay? A son would be the same thing. If the son worships idols, decides not to be Jewish, that would be the same thing. But they say, some of the commentaries say, no, this is obviously connected to znut because it all comes from here. And if they go and leave the religion, they must be engaging in znut, and they connect it back because they can't understand where you got to this avodah zarah thing when it's only said in the sugya here. So there's all sorts of questions that come up, and it's interesting, but we're going to move on. We're up to the last words in that Mishna. If I want to remind you of the structure, we ended with the last section was all about the court, what happens to the court. We finished the court proceedings. We got to the Gemara Din, and then immediately they said they take him out to be stoned. And then they get to this, oh, by the way, there's 4 mitot. After describing the whole stoning procedure, then said there's 4 mitot beit din, and we had the whole machloket in our Mishnah who says which is more severe. Then we got to these words, zo mitzvat niskalim, which is weird because it sounds like it's introducing something, but it's not, because the next Mishnah is, which we'll see in a minute, is mitzvat nisrafim. So the Gemara wants to understand this. My tana de katani zo mitzvat niskalim. What were they trying to tell you? Well, mishum de tana ni Gemara di motziino to the saklo, beit haskila yagabash de komod. Well, it's because what happened here? There was a different way they could have organized it. They could have said, we finished the court judgment, now the ruling, and now we're going to say there's 4 mitot beit din, and here they are, here's the order, and then start with skila. But because they wanted to, it's always a question how you do a transition when you're writing. So what they decided to do as the transition was, they finished this, and now immediately we're going to start stoning you. And then they're telling you, well, by the way, there's 4 mitot beit din, and zo mitzvah niskalim, meaning the one we already discussed is the niskalim, and that's why we're not going to deal with it going forward. And now we're going to move on to the nisrafim. So I did the kabbalah, the mitzvah nisrafim, because now they're going to start with the nisrafim. Tananami zo mitzvah niskilin. They're going to tell you we already dealt with skila before. Mitzvah, which is interesting in terms of, what you remember that we did already and not, and they want to just put it all in perspective. But it is a little bit strange that it's there. Okay, Mishna. We're going to do today the Nisrafim, the Neharagim, and the Nechnakim. We're going to get into the graphic, gory details of how they executed someone. I know there's been some discussion in some of the chats about this is a hard topic to handle. For sure it is. But there's a few things that are going to reappear on this page. Two main concepts that I want you to keep in mind. One, it's going to appear a few times, is this idea that once the temple was destroyed, they didn't do the death penalty anymore. Even some, right, we saw also 40 years before already, they weren't doing the death penalty. That's first of all. And in general, they tried to, right, they didn't want to do, besides, it was limited after to that. You can't do it at all because the Sanhedrin's no longer in the temple. They also, even then, they didn't want to do it. They tried as best as they could not to execute people. Now, it's hard to avoid it. The Torah says, mot yumat, mot yumat, mot yumat, mot yumat. But we understand that the rabbis took values of the Torah. This is evil. It's a way of the Torah saying, this is a terrible action to do. And therefore, you're deserving the death penalty. However, the rabbis limited when we're going to kill people. So it's true. They're going into graphic description about how it's supposed to be done, but it wasn't really done. And we're even going to see today a little bit, some discussions about that. And the other thing we're always going to see is this concept of bror l'mitayafa, which is going to appear 3 times on our daf today, about how we have to choose the quickest, less painful, most, painless, and like both fast and not disgraceful kind of death. Okay, which we already discussed before. Remember the stoning, we're not going to throw you from too high up in the building because it will be very disgraceful to your body. We also don't want to throw you from too low because we want you to die quickly. As we saw this already a few times. So keep those ideas in mind. I think they'll help calm you down about the whole thing. There was also a discussion about the women, and the whole focus was on the women because the whole Nisrafim was about the bat kohen. In other words, it is a case where there's a woman who's getting a more severe punishment, but it's not an uneven. That, again, I explained already today why she's highlighted, because she's a reflection on her father. Okay. And he's a kohen, and that's a poor reflection. Now you could say it does leave aside the question, what if the son goes and sleeps with a married woman when he's the son of a kohen? Wouldn't that disgrace the father as well? So again, in those societies, and you see them in societies today, where it's more of a disgrace for the woman than if the woman does it than the man. But again, he will get stoned. He did something, he will get strangulation. He did something terrible. Nobody thinks it's okay to commit adultery. It's just that the family disgrace is more when it's the girl than it is the boy. And unfortunately, that's a reality that we see in general, not just here in the text. You can agree with it and not agree with it, but it is a reality that this is reflective of, certainly in those times, and also, unfortunately, in our times as well. But again, nobody says adultery is okay for the man either. The man is getting killed just as well. Okay, so keep that in mind. Mitzvah Nisrafin. So how did they do it? Now, what we're going to learn is the beginning of Nisrafin is actually strangulation. Okay, and why do they do that? Because imagine you're getting strangulated. What do you need? They're strangling you. The first thing you're going to need is to try to breathe. What are you going to do to do that? You're going to open your mouth. And that's the goal here, because burning, what you might have thought burning is wrapping you in branches and lighting you up on fire. That is not burning. So, and that's going to be a whole discussion today as well. They stick you into the ground, into fertilizer, it sounds like. I don't know exactly. They translate this zevel, but until your knees, meaning they want you in place so you don't move. You put a hard cloth with a soft cloth, okay, into manure, thank you. You put a hard cloth into a soft cloth. Okay, Rashi explains why. The soft cloth won't do enough. The hard cloth will be too harsh, so we find something in the middle. You put around their neck. We have 2 people pulling on either side. And it's basically until it basically strangles you enough that you open your mouth. As soon as you open your mouth, what do? They light up a wick. We're going to learn in the Gemara, the first thing they're going to say is the wick was a lead wick. Okay, they would have it like hot molten lead. They would take the wick with the hot molten lead, throw it down his throat. I told you it's going to be a little disgusting. And it goes into the insides, burns the inside of your body. And with that, you die. Rabbi Yehuda he says, wait, I have a problem with what you're saying. He's going to have a whole bunch of issues in these Mishnayot. If you start choking them, what if they die from the choking? And then you won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah of giving this person streifa, and they were supposed to be burned. What do? You take tongs and you pry open the mouth with tongs, some sort of tongs that would be able to, keep it open. And that's how you do it. You don't try to strangle them first, because if you choke them and they die from choking, you won't be able to fulfill the mitzvah of this person's supposed to die by burning, not by choking. It's interesting because we had it with stoning, where first you throw them and only after you stone, and you might not even get to stoning, but there at least throwing someone from the building seemed to be part of the stoning process, even though it seemed weird because ragmuoto aven, it sounds like you need stones. So interesting. Now, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok, Maaseh bebat kohen achad shezinta, v'kifua chavilei zmarot usrafua. Rabbi Elazar ben Sadok is one of the early Tanaim who lived still in the time of the temple. And he's testifying about things that happened in the temple. So he says, I saw it happen. I saw them wrap her with twigs. And I saw them burn her with these branches. And therefore, I don't know what you're talking about. They said, that Beit Din didn't know what they were doing. We're going to get to this later. Very interesting. What kind of Beit Din doesn't know what they're doing? Right? That would be strange. We're going to talk about this later. And we're going to have two versions of the story. My ptila. So as I said, the first thing is, what's this wick? Avar is lead. Okay, it's a wick of lead. Minalan. How do we get this? Now we're going to derive where we get this idea that streifa is burning from the inside and not from the outside, where everyone would just assume the obvious would be burning from the outside. Streifa me'adat Korach. We're going to learn it from Korach. It says streifa there, that they were burned, and it says streifa here, they were burned. Now, how do we know Korach was burned in that way? We're going to see. Malalan sreifat neshama v'guf kayam, just like by Korach, it was sreifat from the inside, burning from the inside, but the body stayed intact. Ad kan sreifat neshama v'guf kayam. Same thing here. Rabbi Elazar Amar, atis sreifa mibnei Aaron. Who else gets burned in the Torah? The sons of Aaron. Also, Gzera Shava, but a different one. Remember, Nadav and Avihu come into the temple to bring their own fire, and they get burned by the fire, right? They get burned. So there also it says Sreifa, and there also we're assuming it was Sreifat Neshama B'Guf Kayam, and therefore also here. So now we're going to have to figure out, why did this one say that and that one say that? Well, Mandi Yalef Me'adak Korach Menale. First of all, where does he get it from that they died in this way? First, we have to prove what's their proof in the verse for the fact that it wasn't burning from the outside. After they die, they talk about these, they bring these pans and this whole thing, and then it says bin nafshotam, that they died in their souls. So what do they assume from there? That specifically it was their souls that were burned, the inside and not the outside. V'idach. So now, what does the other side do? Why did they learn it from Nadav Avihu and not here? So they say, oh, we don't understand the pasuk at all that way. Why did they die? Why is it called a bin nafshotam? Idach hahisrefa mamashi. First of all, when it says they were burned, like you would imagine burning on the outside. So what's this bin nafshotam? And this, we're going to come back to this idea later. Shenitchayvu srefa aliske nafshotam. Okay, your nafshotam often also means what you eat, your food. They were convicted because of food. How so? What we're going to learn is that, how did Korach get all these people? They're going to say later they were actually Talmidei Chachamim, because the Gemara loves to do that, right? Take what were their society and say, oh, it was also then. The people who followed Korach were originally Talmidei Chachamim, but what happened? Korach seduced them with food, right? The way to a person's heart is through their stomach. So seduced them with food. When they would flatter Korach more so they would get more food. And then once they started flattering him a lot, they ended up following him. Okay, and that caused their downfall. So it's because of their nafshotam, as we're going to see right now, what I just said inside part of it. Kidrish lakish, Amar Rish lakish, my dachti bechanfi laagei maog, charok alai shinemo. Now we're going to explain this pasuk. It's a very hard pasuk to understand from Tilim. V'shvil chanufa shechnifu lekorach v'chanfila ago. That means the chanifa, that's all flattery that they gave to Korach. Some people say they flattered Korach. Some people say Korach flattered them. Hard to know who flattered who. This version definitely seems they flattered Korach. Al iske legima. What's la'agi? Legima. Swallowing, right? And why ma'og? Ma'og is food. The root, like uga, comes from, right, food, cake. So because of iske legima, because of things they ate, harak, what's harak alai shinemo? That means like crunching your teeth, grinding your teeth. Well, who ground what teeth? Harak alehem sarshal gehenom shinav. The angel of hell basically put his teeth upon them and destroyed them. Okay, so what destroyed them was the food. And that means that the nafshotam had nothing to do at all with how they died, had to do with why they died, in which case we have no proof from Korach, and that's what they learned from Nadav and Avihu. Now, how do we get it from Nadav and Avihu that that's how they died? Mandi Aleph mi bnei Aaron minale. Where did he get it? Dichtiv vayamutu lifnei Hashem. Vayamutu usually is a natural death. So what did they say? Ke'ein mita. It was like they just died a natural death because there was no outward sign of burning. They just burned on the inside and dropped dead. V'idach. What does the other opinion say that learned it from Korach and not from there? No, that was actual burning. Umay dichtiv vayamutu. So how do we explain vayamutu? It started, okay, we have three options of how they died. Either they died burning on the inside, or they died burning on the outside like a fire. Now we're going to learn it was a combo, according to this opinion, and that's why they didn't learn it from there, because it both was on the inside and then the outside, and we're going to describe like this. It started on the inside, that's why it says vayamutu, but then it also went outside and burned their bodies. Ditanya, as it says in the following Braita, Rabbi Yossi ben Dostai Mil, two threads of fire came out of the Holy of Holies. So two strings kind of fire. They split into two each one, so you now have four. Went down their nostrils, right? Both their nostrils went into both of them, burned them from the inside, and then came usrafum and then burn them on the outside. Okay? Vahakti vatochalotam. But wait, it says, and the fire ate them, which they assume means them and not something else. So they assume that meant them, meaning their insides and not their outside. So they say, no, otam velo bigdehem. No, it burned the inside and the outside. What didn't burn, like it was sort of a miraculous fire, their clothes didn't burn. Imagine a person burning without the clothes burning, right? That was the miraculousness of the fire. Just they burned, nothing else. Can imagine, because they're in the temple also. If the clothes started going on fire, the fire would have spread. So it was this kind of miraculous fire that just burned them and not their clothes. So again, we have two approaches here to how they died. Was it from the inside and the outside, or was it just in the inside? And obviously the one who says the inside learns from here to our case. Mistabra. So now they say, wait a minute. If we look at Nisrafim in the Torah, so we have Korach, we have Nadav and Avihu, and each one explained their interpretation. But why don't we learn Miparim and Nisrafim? Malalan Srefam Mamash, Hafkan Srefam Mamash. Remember the Parim and Nisrafim? The Paralim Dever Shel Tzibor, or the Par Kohen Mashiach, when someone sins and they're a leader, or different cases, they bring this bull offering, which gets slaughtered in the temple, but then gets taken outside the temple to burn. So we take the dead animal and we burn it outside. Burning, how do we burn it? On a fire. Outside burns. Why don't we learn it from there? If we're doing sreifa, where sreifa appears, why don't we learn it from them? And then it would be regular burning. Well, now we're going to go through our lists. How similar is it to this, and how similar is it to that? More likely, we're going to learn from Korach and Nadav and Avihu. Sheken Adam, number one, they're people, humans, as opposed to a par, and we want to learn about a human getting killed. Chote, they sinned. Nadav and Avihu, right? It was all punishment for sinning. Korach and our person who gets streifa, as opposed to the animal, which didn't do a sin. The animal, I mean, someone did a sin here, but not the animal. Nishama, there's a killing of someone. The par is already dead when they burn it. It's a dead animal. Pigul is an issue that comes up specifically in korbanot, and there's no pigul in any of Nadav and Avihu, and our case has no pigul, the burning of a person. So, and Parin Nisrafim does, so four ways in which it's similar to the others. But Mandi Aleph Me'adak Korah, I skipped. Adraba, Miparim Nisrafim Havalei Lemelech. What do you mean? Let's go the other way. Sheken Machshir L'Dorah. There's two ways it's similar to Parim and Nisrafim. Number one, Parim and Nisrafim is something you're supposed to do. If the sin happens and they bring the sacrifice, you have to burn it. If the person sins and you have to kill them, you have to burn them. So it's very similar. Nadav and Korach wasn't like you're supposed to do this, right? God did if God burned them. It's not the same thing. And Lidorot, and those were two one-time events. Parim and Trafim is for future generations, and so is burning in the Beit Din. But Hanach Nefishim, right? Obviously, there's 4 similarities to those and 2 similarities to those, so therefore, we learn it from those. Mandi Yalef Me'adak Korach. We still have a little bit more left here. If you're going to learn it from Korach, my time, Yalef Mibnei Aaron. Why don't you learn it from Nadav and Aviv? Hahu Sreifa Mamash Havai. So they say, right? We already learned this because they assumed Nadav and Aviv got burned from on the outside. So they say, if so, though, V'neilaf Mina. Why don't we learn that that's how we burn them from the one who holds that Nadav and Aviv died a regular burning? Maybe that should be the example then, and that's how we learn that burning is a regular burning. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravu, Amar Kra. Here's the first time we're going to say this today. You should love your fellow friend as yourself. Bror lo mitayafan, therefore choose a better death. If you burn someone from the outside, it takes a while until they actually burn on the inside and die. If you pour hot lead down their throat, they'll die very quickly, and therefore it's a better death. Also, it's less destroys their body on the outside. It only destroys the body on the inside. So it's a more respectful death. And again, not necessarily that you want to die in any way, but if you're going to die, it's a better way to die. Quicker and nice, more respectful. Now they say, okay, wait. If this is the better way to die, then what do you even need a Gzera Shava for? To learn it from Nadav and Avihu or learn it from Korach? You should just learn it because it's the better way to die, and therefore it should be the preferred method. Well, Ilav Gzera Shava. If we didn't have a Gzera Shava, Havamina Sreifa Neshama B'Guf Kayam Lav Sreifa Yiklal. You might have thought that's not called burning. That's why we had to learn the Gzera Shava to teach it is a method of burning, and then since it's the best method, we're going to go with that one. Last question here. If it's because of Ahavta l'recha kamocha, first of all, what's la'agal? Hashta ba'agal bizman kariv, we say, right? That means quickly. So now they say if we're going with borlo mitayafa, why don't we do pour hot lead down your throat and cover you with branches, and then we'll do this chick-chock. It'll be as quickly as possible. So and that's why you needed also. Yeah, in other words, that's why you need the Hafta l'recha kamocha and Gzera Shava to teach. We have to find the balance. In other words, yes, on the one hand, we want to do that, but we're going to do it like that because what's the problem also? It's not respectful for the body that the body gets burned on the outside. So we're going to go that. We're going to do that, both. We're going to learn part from that and part from that. Now, there's a big question in the Mefarshim on the Torah, and also it comes up in the Gemara, not here, but why Nadav and Avihu got killed. Okay, our Gemara is going to bring just one opinion. Okay, there's a lot of opinions about what they did wrong because it's not so clear from the text. So they brought an Eish Sarah into the temple, but this whole question, what was so wrong about this, and many different interpretations. And think about why you think our Gemara is bringing this interpretation. They now describe this scenario. Moshe and Aaron were walking. And they're behind them. Okay, this is kind of they're lining up the hierarchy. Who goes first, the most important, the second, and then the rest of the people. When are they going to die? And we can be the leaders already, right? I'm ready for Moshe and Aaron to die, and we go into our natural place as the leaders. You'll see who will bury who. And Amar of Papa Hainu Damri Nashe, this is what people say. Nefisha Gamle Sabe de Tiine Mashke de Hungade. There's a lot, this is a quip people say on the street. There's a lot of old camels carrying the skins of the young. Okay, meaning even though it's not supposed to be that way, sometimes, right, there's a lot of situation where that happens. Right. It's hard to talk about this right now when we have a lot of families that have lost their children in the war. It's unfortunately an unfortunate reality, and in some generations, it's much more than others, like we're living through right now. But the main thing here that they want to focus on is, first of all, if you notice, they're making Nadav and Avihu very much like Korach. They're connecting them, which makes sense. If they were both burned, there maybe is some connection between them. And Korach was also saying, who made you leaders, right? They're not exactly saying who made you leaders, but they're saying time for you to move on and we want to come in. And it's this really wanting to be a leader. And why is this discussed in Sanhedrin? Because we keep returning to these ideas about what is a good leader, what is not a good leader, and trying to get rid of their parents so that they could, or hoping for their quick death so that they could become the leaders is obviously not the appropriate way to go. So anyway, all connected with the topics we've been discussing in our Masechet. Moving on, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. The last part of the sugya of Korach now. What is a Tamid Chacham like? Lifnei Am Haaretz. And Tamid Chacham in the eyes of an Am Haaretz. Remember, they like to split up the people into the Am Haaretz, the people who don't know a lot, and the Tamidei Chachamim. B'tchila domeh lekiton shel zahav. In the beginning, Am Haaretz sees a Tamid Chacham. They say, "Wow, Tamid Chacham! I have a lot of respect for them. Even though they're Am Haaretz, they have respect for Tamidei Chachamim." However, the Tamid Chacham has to kind of watch his behavior to make sure he stays in that position of respect. If siper himenu, if he starts having random conversations with these people, like about nothing of importance, domeh lekiton shel zahav. Oh, so I didn't translate. First, he looks like a jug of gold. Okay, really amazing. Then he gets lowered to a jug of silver. Once he starts talking to him about mundane things, that lowers him down to getting closer to the level of the Am Haaretz. Neheneh mimenu, if he starts to benefit from him and develop a relationship with him, like they did with Korach, that they were eating his food. Domeh lekiton shel cheres. They become like an earthenware vessel. What's the problem with an earthenware vessel? Kevan shenishbar shuv ein lo takana. Once it's broken, you can't fix it. And basically what they're saying is, once you lower yourself to that level with the Am Haaretz, you will never go back to the level of respect again. And then, like we saw with Korach, they ended up being kind of pulled by Korach to follow in his ways. Imarta batali. Now we're going to go back to this idea of burning. So we got the fact that burning is done in this way, either from Korach or Nadav and Avihu. We explained why we didn't learn it from Purim and Nisrafim. We explained why each person who learned each one didn't learn the pasuk in the same way as the other. How did they learn the pasuk? Okay, now we get to a real case that happened. Here's a woman. Her name is Imarta Batali. Bat Kohen, she's in Tavai. She was a Bat Kohen who engaged in snoot. And even though I told you they didn't do the death penalty, listen to what happens. He puts branches around her and bunches of branches and burns her. Amar Rav Yosef ta'abitarte. Rav Yosef says, wow, this person made two big mistakes. Number one, you should know this all, right? Ta'abitmatna. Number one, he burned her in the wrong way. He should have poured hot lead down her throat. Vit ta'abititanya, and he made a mistake because look at what the Braita says. They darshan this pasuk. Ubata la kohanim alavim ve'ela shofet asher yeh b'yimim. You go to the kohen, the Levi, and the shofet who's in your day. Bizman sheyesh kohen yesh mishpat. Bizman she'ein kohen ein mishpat. When there's kohanim, there's mishpat. When there's no kohanim, meaning no kohanim who are operational, meaning there's no temple, there's no mishpat. You cannot do capital punishment. So what were you doing killing her? Right? Number one, you killed her in the wrong way. Number two, you shouldn't have killed her at all. So we see that even though there wasn't capital punishment, some people apparently had a different approach to this and did do this, both in terms of how to kill and in terms of to kill at all. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. Now we're going to go back to that rabbi in the Mishna, early Tanah, who basically comes and testifies about what he saw happen. And the rabbi said to him, oh, that was a beit din that wasn't baki. So to explain what that means, Amar Rav Yosef beit din shel tzdukim hava. It was at Stuki court. Remember that Stukim, what did it, first of all, the Kohanim often were Stukim, and Kohanim were also judges. And the Stuki court goes by the written Torah, and the written Torah says Sreifa, and Sreifa means burning. So they thought burning meant the way we would think burning is. They didn't have the tradition of the rabbis, because they didn't hold by the same oral tradition, that that's not what it is. So Hachi Amar Lehu, Vahachi Ahadru Lehu, they say, wait a minute. The way the Mishnah says it, that's what he said, and that's what they said back to him. We have a different version of the story. V'hatanya. Amar Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, Zichruni k'shayiti tinyokum murkavak tefo shel abba. You might remember this, comes up a lot, this phrase. I remember when I was a little kid and I was on the shoulders of my father. Why they say on the shoulders of my father, I don't know, maybe because you could see better. And I saw the following thing. Heviu bat kohen shezinta v'kifua chavilei zmarot usrafua. I saw it happen. So when he's older, he comes to the court and he tells them, by the way, if you want to, I'll tell you some things I saw when I was a kid. And it often happens with things about the temple. Like, this is what I saw when I was a kid because, whatever rabbis are around still were only kids at the time. So, and I saw she engaged in znut, and they basically put branches around her and they burned her, trying to prove the other way. And yes, I see what you're saying, right? What was he doing seeing this execution? Very good question. Amrulo katan hayita ve'im mevi'im ra'aya min katan. Say you were young then. Maybe you misunderstood what you saw. Maybe that wasn't it. Maybe you got the facts wrong. We don't trust Tanim. Now, it's true you're a Gadol now, but the fact that you saw when you were Katan doesn't prove anything. So now we have a totally different version of the story, to which the Gemara answers, Shnei Ma'asim Avu. It happened twice. Once was when he was a Katan, and another when he was a Gadol. And now the question the Gemara asks, which we've had in a few other circumstances, hey, Amar Lahu Bereisha, if we have these two stories, and we're assuming it wasn't just two versions of different stories, but the Gemara's assumption is both happened, which was the one he told them first? So, Elam, obviously the one that happened first was when he was a Katan, but which did he tell the rabbis first? Because what we're assuming is he told them one, they rejected it, and then he tried the other one, and they rejected it as well. If it was the first one, and he said, I saw them do it, and then he said, oh, it was a beitin, it wasn't baki. Amar Lukshu Gadol, velo eshkachube. He said, I saw it when I was older, and they didn't listen to him. Amar Lukshu Katan ve'eshkachube. What, he's going to say it when he's young, and then he's going to say, oh, well, by the way, when I was a little kid, I saw one, and that's going to work to convince them? Of course not. Ela, it must be, Amar Luhu Bereisha. He must have said, first, I saw it when I was young, and they said, oh, you were young. We don't take that. And then he said, oh, I also saw it when I was older, right? And they said, you were young. And then he brought the other one. They said, oh, we reject that too. Because that court didn't know what they were doing. Which again, now we understand a little bit better. It's not just, oh, it was a random court that didn't know what they were doing. They were different courts. Some were run by the Prushim and some were run by the Tzdukim. And this is a classic Prushit-Tzduki debate, at least according to the way the Gemara is explaining it. Which makes sense, it would be a debate about how they executed people with streifa. And therefore, we have these two different approaches. Obviously, our Gemara is telling us that one is the wrong one and ours is the right one. Mitzvat haneragim. Now we get to hereg, or saif, which we call it. And also we're going to say cherev because it's done with a sword. Mitzvat haneragim, how would they do it? Hayumetizin et rosho b'saif. Okay, it doesn't mean they stab him. They cut off the head, decapitate, basically, with a sword, kederach shamachudosa. And they say, just like the king does, right? I see you writing off with your head, right? The way the kings do it. This is going to raise a whole question. What, we do things the way the Gentiles do them? Isn't that forbidden? Don't worry, it's the first question of the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees and says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, not because of that reason. He says, nivululo, that's a despicable way to die. They lie you down. They don't, like, the assumption here is you're standing up and they decapitate you. No, you lie them down like on a butcher block. And then you take a butcher knife, kofitz is a really big knife, like a cleaver, and they just chop off his head. Very unpleasant also, to which the rabbis say, Amru lo, emi tamadu velet miso. That is a much worse way to die than just standing up and decapitating. You can see that they were struggling with the same things we are, which is, wow, this is really disgusting. So now we're going to have a different version, though, in the Tosefta. Tanya, that their debate wasn't exactly based on this. Amar lahem Rabbi Yehuda lachachamim, afani yodea shemi tamadu veleti. I agree with you that it's a disgraceful way to die, but aval ma yaseh? Sharei amra Torah u'b'chukoteihem lo telechu. The rabbi said you can't do things in the way the Gentiles do, and decapitating while you're standing up is the way the Gentiles do it. Of course we can't do it like that, even though, right, we're constantly struggling with these values. We want Barolo Mitayafa, but we also don't want to be following the Gentiles. We're always in this struggle between conflicting values. So that's a different version. Rabbanan, how the rabbis deal with this. Well, it might be we do some things like the Gentiles, but it's because we do them and they do them. It's not we do them because they do them. This also says in our Torah, saif. What is saif if not decapitating? So, and he says, if you don't believe me, and if you don't say that, I'm going to prove to you there's other things we do that are like the Gentiles, and clearly the Torah thinks it's fine. And we do it because it's written in the Torah. Now, it's not going to be written in the Torah, this one. It's going to be written in the prophets. Okay, and we have this pasuk not so long ago. Haditanya sorfim ala melachim v'lo midarchei amori. Okay, we burn things of the kings. Okay, when kings would die, they would burn their personal items. I don't know exactly what, but they would burn vessels of theirs and things like that. And it's not midarchei amori. Okay, even though the Gentiles do it, it's not because of that. Hechi sarfina. How do we do this? V'aktivu chotel lo telechu. It says don't follow Gentile ways. Ela kivan dichtiv sreifa ba'oraita, because it says it in the Torah dichtiv. U'b'misrefot avotecha. This is the pasuk about Tzidkiyahu. When he was, they promised him, even though he was in the time of the destruction of the second temple, and he's taken to exile, he said, but you will die in a respectful way like your fathers did, and we'll burn your stuff like we burned your father's items. He was the king, his items were burned, so you see there's a source for that. So now they say, Lav minayu kagamrina. Don't we learn from there? Hachanami, likewise here. Kevan tichtiv saifbo, right? Lo minayu kagamrina. Okay, basically we're saying we don't learn it. It's not because the Gentiles did it. We have our own sources for doing this. So it's not considered part of B'chukotehem lo telechu. So again, according to the Mishnah, it was a machloket about what is a more disgraceful death. According to or which is a better death. And according to the Tosefta, the machloket is one thinks it's B'chukotehem lo telechu and the other thinks it's not. Now we have to get to who gets hereg. How do we know? Hadsnam beidach pirkin eluhen anerigim. They're not quoting forward. We're going to see who gets killed in this way. We have rotzeach, a murderer, and anshei ir anidachan, and the people who worship idols. When the whole city goes to worship idols, we already learned this. Bishlama ir anidachak tibu lefi charev. There it says cherev, so we know that's what it is. Ela rotzeach minalam, but a murderer. Where do we get that from? Tanya, they're going to learn from an interesting pasuk. The Braita says, Nakom yinakim. What's this context? If somebody kills their Canaanite slave, Nakom yinakim, it says. You will get avenged for the right. There will be revenge for what you did. Nikimazo eniote amai. I don't know what this nikima means, but kishu omel bebeit elechem cherev nokemet nikam brit haveomer nikivazo sayif. Okay, there's a pasuk that connects between nikama and a cherev. So we learn that the nikima in the Torah must be with a cherev. Ve'ema debar is lemivras, but that doesn't prove decapitation. It proves, maybe stabbing. Berez is a faucet, like you open a faucet, right? Maybe you just stab them with the point. Lefi cherev tiv. It says lefi. Lefi cherev is the pet of the cherev. Now, what's the pet of the cherev? You might have thought the mouth of the cherev is the point. No, it's not, because it talks in the Torah about cherev pipiot. It has two pez. Means the two sides. So you use the side, the blade, and not the point of it. So that's why it's not stabbing. Okay, that's how we get it from the Torah. Now, Ema da'avid legistra. Well, maybe you use the blade, but you slice the person top to bottom, right in the middle. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, you know where this is going. Amar Krab, Ahavta l'recha kamocha, brur lo mitayafa, right? Could you imagine what it would look like? The person's body, all the parts falling out. Okay, that's not a nice way to die. Eshkacha, I think that's second time in this, or is it already the third time? I don't remember even, but yeah, I think it's the second time. Maybe we already said three, I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, let's keep going. Eshkachan de katal avda. Wait, that's when you kill a slave, but maybe it's different if you kill a Jew, right? Bar chorim minale, a free person. How do we know that you get this punishment? Well, they say, now it's obviously not skila and streifa, because there's special limudim in the psukim that make it very clear which one is which. But the lav kavachomer, right? Maybe it's chenek. So they say, well, obviously it's kavachomer. Katalav de b'sayif bar chorim b'chenek. You're not going to give a lighter punishment. Remember, chenek is lighter according to the rabbis. You're not going to give a lighter punishment if they killed a Jew to killing a slave. It's at least going to be the same, if not more severe. So that's where we're going to get to. It's the same thing. Hani chalamanda mar chenek kal. Obviously, you know where the Gemara is going. That's only if you think chenek is less severe. El lamanda mar chenek chamor ma'ikalamemar. But according to Rabbi Shimon, who thinks chenek is more severe, maybe you should get chenek for regular murder. So nafkalemi ditanya, they learn it from the following bright. Atat va'er tadama nakimi kirbecha. This is in egla rufa case. When someone gets killed and we don't know who killed, we do the egla rufa. Hukshu kol shofchei damim la egla rufa. They compare here. Anyone who kills dam naki is like the egla rufa case. Ma lahalam b'sayif u'minat savar, avkan b'sayif u'minat savar. Just like there, it's with a sword, it's with a knife, and on the neck. Also here on the knife and with the knife and on the neck. But they say, wait a minute, if you're going to learn from egla rufa, maybe you need a big cleaver. Now that was what Rabbi Yehuda said. The rabbis didn't say that, and maybe you need it to be on the back of the neck, which is what they do the egla rufa. So here's time number 3. I was right. That was only time number 2. Here it comes. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Avua, Amar Krab, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, brur lo mitayafa. Okay, it's not nice to do it on the back of the neck with a cleaver, and therefore that's not the way we do it. Okay, so that's how we learned Rotzeach from Nakom Yinakim. From there we got to, and also it's not going to be any less bad for a regular Rotzeach Yisrael. And from there we learned that, and the method from the Egla Rufa. Now we get to Mitzvah Nechnakim. Hayom Meshakim Oto. Okay, the beginning is basically exactly the same as we did for the Streifa, because first we choke them. Mitzvah nechnakim yimshak'in oto bezevel ad kurvotav, put him in the manure until his knees. Notain sudar kasha l'toch harakav korech al tzavaro, right? They take this cloth that's hard and both hard and soft, or hard one and a soft one together. They put it around his neck. Here we have the one difference, which is they do this until the person's dead. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we want to know who gets chenek, because chenek is the only death not really mentioned explicitly in the Torah. And we already know who gets chenek. Tanu Rabbanan, ish. Okay, so the first main case where chenek comes up, it's going to come up in a bunch of cases, but one of them is the no'ef and no'afet, which we've discussed a lot of times. So now we're going to darshan that pasuk. Ish asher yon'afet eshet ish. Okay, so they're going to say ish prat katan. Okay, this beginning stuff doesn't really have to do with what we're looking for, but ish means not a katan. Asher yon'afet eshet ish, the wife of a man, prat eshet katan. If there's a woman who's older but is married to a younger man, meaning underage, then she doesn't get the death penalty either. It has to be the wife of your friend and not someone who's not Jewish. Okay, friend usually means someone within the Jewish people. So if she's married to a Gentile, that's not considered marriage according to the Torah. So she's not technically an eshet ish, so it's not considered adultery. Mot yumat bechenek. Here's our big thing. Mot yumat, it says you should be killed. Well, they learn bechenek. So now the Midrash Halakha classic, right? Right? How'd you get to chenek? Maybe it's some other way mentioned in the Torah, and right, cherev, the hereg, or the streifa, or the skila. Well, amarta kol makom shene'emar mita b'torah stam ein ata rashai lemoshcha lachmir aleh ela lakel aleh divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Yoshia says if it just says mita stam and there's no way to learn anything in particular, you have to go with the lightest punishment. This also goes with broilo mita yafa. We can't give a harsher punishment, so we go with the lighter. And obviously he holds like the rabbis that that's the lightest. Rabbi Yonatan Amar lo mipnei shehi kala. It's not because chenek is lighter, because it's not, because he's Rabbi Shimon. Okay, later the Gemara is going to tell us that. Ela kol mitamu rabator sam en ela chelik. He just says blanketly, anytime it just says mita without any indication of anything else, it's chenek. How does he get this? Rabbi Yishmael, well, it's based on Rabbi, who says, Ne'amar mita b'dei shamayim v'ne'amar mita b'dei adam. Often in the Torah it says you're going to die, and it's death by the hands of God. And sometimes it says you're going to die, and it's death by the court. And they both use the same words of mita. So, ma mita hamura b'dei shamayim, mita she'en b'roshem. Now, when you die in the hands of God, you usually just die, like in your sleep or something. So, there's no noticeable signs. Okay, which means it's going to be, if it's chenek or hereg, because again, it's not going to be straight for skila anyway. Cherev or hereg has obviously signs. You're decapitated. You're going to notice that. And we're going to go with chenek because of that. Ve'ema streifa, they said, maybe it is streifa. Why are you saying it's not? Okay, because they specifically said streifa, and they explained it streifa in the bat kohen, that's now, it's very obvious. Adultery and adultery for a bat kohen. Bat kohen has a unique punishment, which means obviously the regular adultery case doesn't have streifa to it. So that's why it can't be streifa. That's obvious. Okay, and with that, we finished today's talk. Very pleasant visuals here. But we finished up that machloka Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, and then we went to the Nisrafim, how you get burned, where we learn it from, Korach or Nadav and Avihu, why not from the Purim and Nisrafim. Then we went to a little bit about what was the sin of Nadav and Avihu, and how did Korach get all these people to follow in his way. And then we got to a few cases where they actually did burn people the wrong way, and they did burn people where they weren't supposed to, and we explained that was Stuki court, or maybe wrong information, or all that. And then we talked about the Neragim, how they did it, why is it not B'chukotem lo telechu according to the rabbis, and who gets it, and how we know who the Rotzach and Yer Nidachak get killed by the sword. And then we went to Misfan and Nechnakim, how they do it, and we had this machloka Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yoshia, how we get that the no'ef and the no'efet is chenek. Okay, we're going to continue that discussion in tomorrow's daf. With that, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Besorot Tovot.